cold dirt against her cheek. Helen Crawford tried to push up and her left leg refused to answer. She called out twice, thin against the pines, then heard paws in the dry leaves, and a big, grey-muzzled German shepherd stepped from the tree line and lay flush against her side without asking. And Helen knew deep down that if that dog left, she would not survive the afternoon. Before we go any further, tell us where in the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. The dirt road behind Helen Crawford's property in Millbrook, Virginia, had never held any secrets before that Tuesday. It was a narrow strip of packed clay winding between the old apple orchard and the tree line that dropped down toward Miller's Creek, and Helen had walked it every morning of the last 4 decades. She knew every root that pushed up under the crust in the fall, every hollow where the rain pooled after a storm, every place where a copperhead might sun itself in July. She knew that road the way most people know the hallway to their own bedroom. But that morning in late October, at 71 years old, with the sky the color of dishwater and a breath of frost sitting in the low grass, Helen tripped on a route she had known since Nixon was president, and the world went sideways. The fall itself was quick. 1 second she was walking, and the next she was on her hip in the dirt, with her left leg twisted under her and a spike of white pain climbing all the way to her ribs. She lay there a full minute before she could think again. When thinking came back, she tried to get up, and her left arm and left leg both told her quietly and firmly that they were not going to help. Not sore, not weak, gone. Like somebody had reached in and turned it off at the wall. She had left the phone on the kitchen counter. She always did. She had walked that road 10,000 times without needing anything but her own 2 feet, and she was not the kind of woman to start hauling a cell phone into the woods at her age. Now the phone sat on a hand-stitched dish towel next to a cup of coffee going cold, and it might as well have been on the moon. She had been feeding the dog for almost a year. Not on purpose at first, she had set out kitchen scraps for the crows, and one morning a big grey-muzzled shepherd with a torn ear had been sitting at the edge of the tree line watching her set the plate down. She'd gone back inside, and when she had looked out 10 minutes later, the plate was clean. That had been the beginning. She had never given him a name until Earl had died 2 Christmases ago. After the funeral, sitting alone at the kitchen window with a plate of ham nobody was going to eat, she had looked out and seen the dog watching her from the edge of the orchard, and she had said out loud, to no one in particular, "You look like a bear." The name had stuck. He did not come inside. He did not sleep on the porch. He came when she set food out and disappeared when she picked up the empty bowl. That was the whole of their arrangement, and it had suited them both. Now Bear was walking straight toward her with the slow, careful gait of a dog who had decided something. He came up alongside her body and lay down without hesitation, pressing his flank against her hip where the pain was, and Helen felt the heat of him come through her coat like a stove being opened. "Good boy," she managed. It sounded thin. Bear laid his head across her arm and did not move. The morning had not been cold when she had left the house. The porch thermometer had read 52, and the frost had been just a whisper in the low places. Now, lying on her side with her cheek in the dirt, Helen could feel the temperature falling. The wind had picked up a note that had not been there earlier. October in the Blue Ridge could turn on a woman without warning. She thought about her daughter Patricia, 4 hours away in Richmond, who called every Sunday afternoon like clockwork. Today was Tuesday. If Helen did not pick up on Sunday, Patricia would be in the car by 6 a.m. Monday. That was 5 days from now. Helen did not have 5 days. She thought about Rick Baxter, the mailman, who came by the box on the county road 3 or 4 times a week. He might notice tomorrow's mail piling up. Might. She thought about Earl. The tears came without warning, sliding sideways down her nose and into the dirt. She hated crying. She had cried exactly 3 times in her adult life that she could name, at her mother's funeral in 1984, at Patricia's wedding, and at Earl's graveside, and now she was going to add a 4th, on her side in the dirt behind her own barn, because she had known for 2 full minutes and refused to say it out loud. She was not going to get up. She was going to die on this road. Bear whined once, low in his throat. She reached up with her good hand and put it on his neck. His fur was cold on top and warm underneath, thick where she buried her fingers, and she could feel his pulse under the pad of her thumb, steady and strong. And that was when she noticed it, a small, hard bump under the fur at the back of his neck, between the shoulder blades. Not a burr, not a tick, something rounder, deeper, put there on purpose. She let her thumb rest on it and thought, in a small, tired way, that Bear had a story she had never asked about, and that she would probably never get the chance to hear it. "Well," she said, "looks like it's you and me, mister." Bear did not move. The hours after that were strange. Helen drifted. She was cold, then colder, then a warmth that scared her more than the cold. She dreamed with her eyes open. She thought she saw Earl standing at the tree line in his old barn jacket, but when she looked again it was only a stump. She thought she smelled cornbread. She thought she heard a school bus, but it was only the wind pulling at the last leaves in the oaks. Bear did not move. Every so often he would lift his head and stare out into the trees, and Helen would hold her breath. Once she heard a deer somewhere close, and Bear's whole body went tight against her side, but he did not leave. He did not chase. He stayed where he was, warm against her hip, and after the deer was gone, he lowered his head again and pressed his nose into the crook of her elbow. She had lost track of time when she heard the truck engine. It was faint at first, coming from the wrong direction, from the back road that ran along the creek, and Helen thought she was dreaming it. Then Bear lifted his head, and the pointed ears came up, and he stood. He looked at her once. Really looked. And Helen, who had lived among animals long enough to know when something was being asked of her, said, "Go on." Bear turned and trotted away. Rick Baxter had been driving mail out of the Millbrook post office for 22 years. He had known Helen Crawford for 11 of them. He knew her cursive on a return envelope. He knew the pattern of catalogues she got in the fall. And he knew, without knowing exactly how he knew, that when Monday's mail was still sitting in her box on Tuesday afternoon, something was wrong. Helen was a Monday noon woman. That mail should have been gone by lunch. He had put a hand on the top of it, felt the cool of an unopened flyer, and stood there in the road for a good 10 seconds before he made a decision that would have made his supervisor grind his teeth. He turned the truck onto her driveway and went to knock on the front door. Nobody answered. He tried the back porch. Nobody. He was on his way back down the drive when a big grey-muzzled German shepherd stepped out of the mouth of the dirt road and stood in the middle of the county road facing his truck. Rick knew dogs. He had grown up on a farm outside Blacksburg with 3 of them, and he had learned young that a dog standing in the road that way was not looking for a fight. Bear's tail was not up. His hackles were not raised. He was just standing there. And when Rick eased the truck forward, Bear turned and walked several yards down the dirt road and looked back over his shoulder. Rick pulled the truck to the side of the county road, shut the engine off, and got out. His mother's voice came into his head, some old warning about strange dogs and country roads, and he told it, quietly, to be quiet. "All right, buddy," he said. "You lead." Bear led. Around the first bend, past the old cattle gate that had not held a cow in 20 years, Bear stopped and lay down. Rick could not see what he was lying next to at first. Then he did. Helen was so small on the ground. That was the first thing Rick would say later to his wife, to the sheriff, to Patricia when she got there. She was so small and so grey and so still, And if Bear had not been lying with his flank pressed against her hip like a second heater, the mailman was not sure she would still have been alive when he knelt down. "Miss Helen," he said. He touched her shoulder. Her eyes came open, hazy, then a little sharper. "Rick," she said, "I'm going to get you help. Don't you move." "Wasn't planning on it," she said, and something almost like a laugh scraped out of her chest. He ran back to the truck for his phone and called the sheriff's office. And then he came back and sat on the cold ground next to her, with his hand on her shoulder, and Bear lay on her other side, and the three of them waited together for the ambulance to find the turnoff. Bear did not leave. When the paramedics came around the bend with the stretcher, Bear stood up and moved 4 paces off and stood there watching. When they lifted Helen, one of the paramedics, a woman who could not have been more than 25, kept glancing at the dog and finally said low to Rick, "That your dog?" "Nope." "Whose is he?" Rick looked at Bear. Bear looked at Helen. "Hers, I think," Rick said. "Only she doesn't know it yet." The paramedics carried Helen up the dirt road toward the ambulance, and Bear followed them all the way to the edge of the county road, and then stopped and sat down in the grass by the mailbox as if he had decided that was as far as his job went. When the ambulance pulled away, he did not run after it. He sat. At Roanoke Memorial, they told Patricia the news in a small carpeted room with a box of tissues on the table. The neurologist was a young woman named Dr. Ashford, who spoke in a soft voice and did not rush. "Your mother has had a small stroke," she said. "It is called a lacunar infarct. Small, but in the wrong place. It affected the left side of her body. The fall did not cause the stroke. The stroke caused the fall." Patricia sat very still. She had driven up from Richmond overnight after Rick had called her. Her hair was still wet from the shower she had taken at 3 a.m. before leaving. "She's going to be all right," Patricia said. "She is stable. She is talking. Her memory is intact. We will do a full workup, but the initial signs are hopeful." "How long was she out there?" Dr. Ashford glanced at her chart. "The paramedics arrived a little after 4 in the afternoon. Your mother says she fell around 10 in the morning." 6 hours. Approximately, yes. In the cold. Yes. How is she alive? Dr. Ashford paused. She had learned in the 7 years she had been doing this that sometimes the medical answer was not the real answer. Her body temperature was very low when they brought her in. Another hour or 2 on that ground and we would be having a very different conversation. The paramedics said something about a dog. A dog. They said the dog was lying against her, sharing body heat essentially, and apparently the dog led the mailman to her. Patricia stared at the doctor for a long moment. Then she put her face in her hands and cried the way people cry when they have been holding it in for hours across state lines. Helen came home 4 days later with a cane and a short list of new rules and an appointment in Roanoke every 3 weeks for at least a year. The neurologist had told her plainly that she should not live alone in the country any longer. Patricia had been on that side of the conversation from the moment she had walked into the hospital room. "You can't stay out here, Mama." "I have stayed out here since 1979, Patricia." "That was with Daddy. I have stayed out here since 2 Decembers ago. That was before." "Before what?" "Before this. Before I got old, you mean." Patricia had not said anything. They drove home from Roanoke on a Saturday afternoon that had the light of November in it already, thin and long and honey-colored on the tops of the trees. Helen sat in the passenger seat of Patricia's SUV with her hand on the door handle the whole way. Her left hand still tingled when it moved. The doctors had said the tingling might last a few weeks. It might last forever. It was too soon to know. When they turned into the driveway, Bear was sitting on the front porch. Patricia braked hard. "That's the dog?" "That's Bear," Helen said. "He's huge." "He's a good boy. Mama, he's been sitting on your porch for 4 days. So? So somebody must have been feeding him. Somebody must have... Patricia! What? He is a good boy, Helen said. Go on and pull up. Bear did not stand. He watched them come up the drive, and he watched Patricia get out of the driver's side, and he watched Helen get out slowly on the other side with her cane, and then, only then, he stood up and came down the porch steps in a stiff, old dog way that Helen had not noticed before, and put his forehead against Helen's good hip and stood there while she rested her hand between his ears. "Hi, Bear," she said. "I made it." Patricia stood in the driveway with her keys still in her hand and did not know what to do. That was how Bear moved onto the porch. Helen put a wool blanket down that first night, and Patricia went to the general store the next morning and bought a proper cushion, muttering about ridiculousness the whole time. By the third day, there was a wooden crate turned on its side to shelter him from the wind, and by the end of the week, Patricia had ordered a real doghouse from a hardware catalogue and was pretending it had been her idea from the beginning. Bear slept on the porch and walked the road with Helen every morning, and slowly, slowly. Helen learned to walk again with her cane in her right hand and Bear's flank against her left leg for a landmark. He seemed to understand the assignment. When she wobbled, he pressed a little harder. When she stopped to breathe, he stopped. When she made it back to the porch, he lay down at her feet with a small groan that might have been satisfaction or might have been arthritis. Patricia stayed for 2 weeks. Then she started making arrangements, home health nurse 3 times a week, a new alert pendant for Helen's neck, a grocery delivery service out of Roanoke, a monthly PT appointment. She did all of it with the fierce, efficient love of a woman who had raised 2 teenagers and knew how to schedule the world into submission. She also did all of it, Helen noticed, without ever quite letting go of the idea that her mother was going to move to Richmond someday soon. "There's a very nice place near me," Patricia said one evening in the 3rd week, "drying dishes at the sink. Just an apartment, independent living. You'd have your own kitchen, and you'd be 20 minutes from us. Patricia, you could bring the dog. They allow dogs." "Patricia." "What?" Helen looked at her daughter's shoulders. They were the shoulders of a tired woman who was trying to be good. Helen loved her fiercely for it. She said gently, "The land is not the problem. I am not going to fall on the road again, and even if I do, Bear is going to be there. I want to stay." "Mama, one dog can't." "One dog already did." Patricia had turned around then, dish towel in her hand, and looked at her mother across the small kitchen. Something had shifted in her face, and after a long moment she had said, softly, "I know." She had gone home the next Saturday. She had left a spare key with the neighbor who lived closest to Helen, a man named Wade Turner, who owned the 200 acres just to the east and had been offering to buy Helen's property for 6 years running. Patricia did not love the arrangement. Wade Turner was not the neighbor she would have chosen, but he lived close, and he was home more often than not, and Helen said she had known him since he was a boy, which was more or less true and also not exactly relevant. Patricia had left him the key because there was nobody else to leave it with, and she had driven back to Richmond with the taste of an unfinished argument in her mouth. The first week of November brought a hard freeze. Helen kept a fire going in the wood stove and walked the road every morning with Bear beside her, shorter now and slower, but every morning without fail. She had made it, some mornings, only to the old cattle gate before turning back. Other mornings she made it further. Bear did not seem to care about the distance. He walked when she walked and waited when she waited, and when they turned around, he turned around, and neither of them spoke. It was on one of those cold mornings that Helen first noticed the truck. She saw it through the kitchen window while she was making coffee, a dark red pickup rolling slowly past the mouth of the driveway. She did not think anything of it. The county road got traffic, especially at hunting season, but it came back an hour later and again in the afternoon. And the next morning too, On the third day, she saw it stop at the top of the drive, and a man got out and stood in the road, looking down toward the house. He was too far away to see clearly. He got back in the truck and drove on before she could put her cane on and go outside. The fourth day, he pulled into the driveway. Bear stood up on the porch. Not aggressive, just up. The truck rolled to a stop beside the porch, and a man got out, mid-50s, heavy-shouldered, wearing a barn coat that looked new. He had a face Helen had never seen before, and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry to trouble you. I was wondering if I might have a word." Bear did not move from the top of the porch steps. He was not growling. He was just standing there, planted, between the man and Helen's front door. "That's all right," Helen said. She stayed on the porch. She did not invite him up. "What can I help you with?" The man glanced at Bear. Then he did something odd. He crouched down in the driveway, slapped his thigh twice, and said, "Rex, come here, boy." Bear did not move. The man's smile did not slip exactly, but something behind it recalculated. He straightened up. "Mom, I have been looking for this dog for a year and a half." Helen said nothing. "His name is Rex. He got out of my kennel over near Bedford in May of last year. I've been driving these back roads for months. Somebody in town told me an older lady out here had taken in a big shepherd." He held out his hand, palm down. "That is my dog, Mom. I would like to bring him home." Helen looked at Bear. Bear looked at the man. And Helen, who had lived among animals long enough to know when a dog and a man had ever laid eyes on each other, and when they had not, said quietly, "This dog does not know you. Mom, he's been out here in the wild a long time. Dogs forget. Some do." The man's smile did slip a little then. "I have papers on him, Mom. AKC papers. I have his puppy photos. I have a chip in his neck registered to my name. That is my dog. I do not want to have to bring the sheriff into this, but I will if I have to." Helen felt the cold on the back of her neck. She felt Bear leaning ever so slightly against her leg, just as he had done on the dirt road, and she felt something inside her set like concrete. "What did you say your name was, sir?" she said. "Wade Turner, ma'am." Wade Turner. The man Patricia had left the spare key with. The neighbor who had been asking to buy her land for 6 years. The man whose voice she had heard for the first time on the day of Earl's funeral when he had come by with a casserole and had said, before the ham on the table had even gone cold, that if she ever wanted to sell, he was ready to make a fair offer. Helen had never met his face. She had only ever heard his voice through the screen door on the days she had refused to open it. She looked at him. He looked back. Something in his face, the small, careful pause of a man who had just said his own name and heard it land wrong, told Helen everything she needed to know. "Mr. Turner," she said, "you have never owned this dog a day in your life. Ma'am, I would like you to leave my property. Ma'am, if you would just let me, I would like you to leave my property, Mr. Turner, now." Bear made a sound then. It was not a growl. It was smaller than a growl, and older, and more certain. It was the sound of a dog telling a man that this was not going to happen today. Wade Turner backed toward his truck. He got in. He shut the door softly, which was somehow worse than slamming it, and he rolled the window down and said, over the running engine, "Ma'am, I'm going to give you a couple of days to think about this, and then I am going to have to make some calls. That's my dog." He drove off. Helen stood on the porch until the sound of the truck was gone from the road. Then she sat down hard on the top step, and Bear laid his head on her lap, and she said out loud, to no one, "Earl, what in the world?" That night she did not sleep. She lay in the bed she had shared with her husband for 41 years, and she stared at the ceiling and she thought, Bear was not a stray. She had known that from the beginning, in the way that country women know things about animals. He had come to her orchard already knowing to sit at a polite distance. He had known to wait for the plate. He had known not to bark. He had lain flush against her side on the dirt road with the exact steady behavior of a dog who had, at some point in his life, been asked to lie flush against a body and had been rewarded for it. Someone had trained this dog. And a year ago, someone had lost him, or someone had let him go, or someone had died and left him. She got out of bed at 4 in the morning and put on Earl's old barn jacket and made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. She wrote a list. She was 71 years old and had had a stroke 5 weeks earlier, and she was making a list at 4 in the morning by the light of a single lamp, and Bear was asleep on the porch on the other side of the door. She wrote, 1. Call the vet. 2. Call Patricia. 3. Call the sheriff. 4. Do not answer the door for Wade Turner. She looked at the list. She added, 5. Check the barn. She did not know at 4 in the morning on that Saturday in early November exactly why she had written that last line. She only knew that when she had said Wade Turner's name out loud on the porch, when she had felt the shape of his lie land in her chest, she had thought all at once and with no warning of Earl. Of the last 6 months of Earl's life, in which he had made 3 trips to Roanoke by himself and had come home from each one quieter than the last, and had told her, when she had asked, that he had been going in for a checkup. Earl had died of a heart attack in the barn on December 17th, 2 years ago. He had been 69, or so the death certificate had said. Helen looked at the list one more time. She underlined the word barn twice, and then she took her cane and her coffee and Bear, and she went out through the cold pre-dawn to the vet's office as soon as it opened at 8. Dr. Kessler was a big, soft-spoken man who had been the county's mixed-practice vet for 30 years. He knew Helen. He had put down the last of her husband's beagles 4 years ago. He looked up when she came in through the front door with Bear at her heel, and he said, "Well, hello, Miss Helen, this the famous dog." Word gets around. Word does. He smiled. "What can we do for you?" "I would like you to scan his neck for a chip." Dr. Kessler's face went thoughtful. He did not ask why. He took them into the back room, and Bear stood on the metal table with the patient, uncomplaining stillness of a dog who had been on metal tables before, and Dr. Kessler ran the wand across the back of his neck. The scanner beeped. A number came up on the screen. Dr. Kessler read it, then read it again, and something in his face changed. "Miss Helen," he said, "this is a K9 chip." "A what?" "Working dog registry, not a household chip." He looked from the screen to Bear, and from Bear back to the screen. "Ma'am, this is a service animal ID." Helen sat down on the small padded bench by the window. She had not planned to sit. She just found herself sitting. "Whose service animal?" she said. "I can call the registry. They will not give me an owner's name over the phone. That is protected, but they will tell me the organization the dog was registered with. And they will forward a message to the current holder of the chip." "Please call," Dr. Kessler called. He stepped out of the room to do it, and Helen sat on the bench with her hand on Bear's flank and did not think about anything at all. She could not have said later whether she waited 5 minutes or 30. When Dr. Kessler came back in, he had a slip of paper in his hand. "Bear," he said, "is registered with the Blue Ridge K9 Foundation out of Lynchburg. He was trained as a search and rescue dog. He was retired from active service 5 years ago, and the current holder of his chip is a woman named Nora Bishop." "Who?" "Nora Bishop. She is the foundation's placement director. I left a message. She will call back today." Helen sat on the bench and looked at Bear. Bear looked back. He had the same face he had always had, grey muzzle, torn ear, eyes that had held her gaze in the dirt on that Tuesday afternoon in October and had told her, in the wordless way that dogs tell things, that she was not going to die. "Search and rescue," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am." "He led the mailman to me, Dr. Kessler, when I fell." Dr. Kessler was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Miss Helen, I do not think that dog just happened to lead the mailman to you. I think that dog was doing his job. She was home by 11. Nora Bishop called the vet's office at 1:30. Dr. Kessler called Helen at 1:32. He gave her Nora's number and said gently that Nora had asked him to please have Helen call her back as soon as possible, and that Nora had sounded, this was Dr. Kessler's word, shaken. Helen dialed with her good hand. It took her 3 tries to get the numbers right. Nora Bishop picked up on the second ring. "This is Helen Crawford," Helen said. "I understand you are looking for a dog." There was a small pause on the other end. Then Nora Bishop said, "Mrs. Crawford, I have been looking for that dog for 18 months. Do you have him?" "He is on my porch." Nora made a sound Helen could not quite identify. Half laugh, half something else. "Mrs. Crawford, I need to drive out to see you. Today, if that is all right. It is a 2-hour drive, may I? Please." Nora Bishop pulled into Helen's driveway at 4:15 that afternoon. She was a small woman in her 40s, thin and dark-haired, wearing jeans and a fleece jacket and boots that had done a lot of walking. She got out of her car and stopped halfway up the porch steps when she saw Bear, and she put her hand over her mouth. "Oh," she said. "Oh, buddy." Bear stood up. He walked down the porch steps and put his head against her knee. Nora Bishop knelt down in the driveway and put her arms around his neck and cried into his fur for a long, quiet minute. Helen stood at the top of the porch steps with her cane and watched, and did not say anything and felt her own eyes burn. Nora finally straightened up and wiped her face on the sleeve of her fleece. She looked at Helen. "I owe you an explanation, Mrs. Crawford." "I would appreciate one, honey." They went inside. Helen made coffee, a small, stubborn ceremony that she was determined to keep doing on her own, and they sat at the kitchen table, and Nora Bishop told her. Bear had been an active-duty search and rescue dog for the Foundation for 6 years. He had worked disaster sites in 3 states. He had found a boy alive in the collapsed basement of a house in West Virginia after a tornado in 2018. He had retired at age 8 when a hip injury made him no longer safe for rubble work, but the Foundation did not consider a retired dog a used dog. They placed retired canines with people who needed them. Veterans, people living alone in rural areas, people with mobility problems, people going through cardiac recovery or stroke recovery. They matched carefully. They did home visits. It was a serious program, and it was small and it was expensive to run. Bear had been placed with a client in May of last year. The client had come to the Foundation himself in the fall of the year before that. He had passed all their checks. He had made an initial donation to the program that had covered Bear's ongoing veterinary care for the next 5 years. He had met Bear twice at the Foundation before they finalized the placement. He had asked the Foundation quietly to hold off on delivering Bear until he could arrange things at home. He had died before he could take Bear home. The Foundation had learned of his death from an obituary his family had run in the Roanoke Times. They had reached out to the wife listed in the obituary and had received no response, 3 phone calls and a certified letter, all unanswered. It was not uncommon for grieving families to not want to deal with paperwork about a dog they had not known existed. But the Foundation had, in the meantime, kept Bear at their kennel, until Bear had escaped one summer morning by pushing open a gate that a summer volunteer had failed to latch properly. Bear had been missing for 18 months. Helen sat at the kitchen table with her coffee cooling in front of her and looked at Nora Bishop across the pine tabletop and did not say anything for a long time. Nora said softly, "Mrs. Crawford, your husband's name was Earl." It was. "He came to us in September of the year before he died. He met Bear on a Tuesday. He came back and met him again a month later. He signed the placement papers on the 15th of November. He asked us not to bring the dog to the property yet. He said he needed a little more time." Helen looked at her hands on the table. "Earl never told me," she said. "No, Ma'am. He said he wanted it to be a surprise." "A surprise?" "He said he wanted to give you a companion because he knew he was dying." Nora was quiet. Then she said, I asked him at the second meeting why he was making this decision. He said, my wife is going to be alone. That was all he told us. But yes, Mum, I think he knew. Helen sat at the kitchen table and did not cry. She wanted to. She could feel it wanting to happen. But she also felt something else, something bigger, opening up in her chest like a window that had been painted shut for 2 years, finally letting in air. Bear was on the floor beside her chair. He had his chin resting on her boot. He had not moved since they had come inside. He came here on his own, she said softly. This dog, from Lynchburg. That is more than 100 miles. It is. How did he find me? Nora Bishop looked at Bear for a long moment. She said, Mrs. Crawford, I have been in this work for 18 years. I have seen dogs do things I cannot explain. I do not know how he found you, but I know that when your husband was at our kennel, he brought something of yours to leave with Bear. Something of mine? A scarf. A wool scarf. Blue, I think. He put it in Bear's bed for the second meeting. He wanted Bear to know your scent. Helen closed her eyes. She had bought that scarf herself. She had lost it the spring before Earl had died and had never known what had happened to it. She had blamed herself for leaving it on a bench somewhere. She had bought a new one at the general store in April. I remember that scarf, she said. Yes, ma'am. Nora Bishop stayed until dusk. She and Helen walked out to the porch as the light was going, and Bear followed and lay down at Helen's feet, and Nora looked at him and said, Mrs. Crawford, I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear me all the way through. All right, honey. This dog was placed with Earl Crawford. Earl Crawford paid for this dog. The paperwork is signed. It is a valid placement. Under the terms of that placement, this dog is yours. He was always meant to be yours. He belongs to you, and he belongs on this porch, and he is not going anywhere. Helen nodded. She did not trust her voice. I'm going to send you the paperwork this week. Certified, notarized, chip transfer, everything. But I want you to know today that if anyone tries to tell you that this dog is theirs, you call me. My cell number is on the card. Day or night, I will drive out. There is a man, Helen said quietly. Nora Bishop's eyes narrowed. What man? A neighbor. He came yesterday. He said Bear was his dog. He said his name was Rex. He said the dog had escaped from his kennel over near Bedford in May of last year. Nora Bishop went very still. Mrs. Crawford, she said, Bear escaped from our kennel in Lynchburg in May of last year. I know. Your neighbor knew the month. He did. There was a long silence on the porch. Somewhere out in the trees a crow called twice. Mrs. Crawford, Nora Bishop said, what is your neighbor's name? Wade Turner. Nora Bishop wrote that down. That night, for the first time, Bear slept inside. Helen did not invite him exactly. She just left the porch door open when she went inside, and after a while Bear got up and padded through the kitchen and lay down on the rug in front of the wood stove with a long, slow sigh, as if he had been waiting for that door to open for a long time. Helen stood in the doorway and watched him and did not say anything. She went to bed with her cane against the nightstand and lay in the dark and thought about her husband. Earl had come home from those Roanoke trips quieter than he had left. She remembered that now with a clarity that hurt. He had told her they were checkups. He had come home smelling like the town, like a coffee shop she had not been to. She had thought at the time that he was simply getting old and slow. She had not once suspected that he had been sitting in a doctor's office being told that the shadow on the scan was going to kill him. She had not once suspected that he had then driven from that doctor's office in Roanoke, a further hour east to Lynchburg, to a canine rescue foundation, to sit on a linoleum floor with a big grey-muzzled shepherd and rub his ears and tell him quietly that he had a job for him. He had known. He had known, and he had not told her, and he had spent the last months of his life making sure that a dog would be waiting for her. She cried then, quietly in the dark, with her face turned into the pillow. She cried for the man who had done that. She cried for the year and a half that Bear had spent looking for her. She cried for the 2 years that she had thought she had been alone. And then, at some point in the middle of the night, she stopped crying and sat up in bed and thought about the second thing. Because there had been a second thing. She had underlined it twice at 4 in the morning on a legal pad. She had written barn. Earl had died in the barn. He had been out feeding the last of the chickens on the 17th of December. She had found him at dinner time when he had not come in. The coroner had said heart attack, and Helen had never questioned it, because he had been 69 years old and a lifelong smoker who had quit too late, and heart attacks in the barn on cold December afternoons were, unfortunately, common in Millbrook, Virginia. But now she wondered. She wondered if a man who had known he was dying, a man who had made 3 trips to Roanoke and a 4th to Lynchburg without telling his wife, might have left something behind in the barn. A letter, a note, a last word. She got out of bed at 6:30 in the morning. She made coffee, she put on Earl's old barn jacket, and she took her cane and Bear, and she went out to the barn. The barn was cold. She had not been in it since Patricia had come up in the summer to help her sort through what could be sold. Most of the tools were still there. Earl's workbench along the north wall, his pegboard with the shadows of a lifetime of screwdrivers and pliers on it, his old canvas coat still hanging on a nail. She went to the workbench. Earl had kept a locked metal box under the bench for as long as she had known him. It had contained, at various times, tax records, spare bolts, the deed to the property, and the paperwork on the truck. It had not, to her knowledge, ever been opened in her presence in the last 5 years. She had assumed the key was on his key ring, which was in the drawer of the front hall table where it had lived since the day of the funeral. She had never checked. She limped back to the house, took the key ring out of the drawer, and limped back to the barn, with Bear ambling along behind. She sat down slowly on the wooden stool by the workbench. She pulled the metal box out from under the bench. She tried 3 keys before one turned. The box opened. On top of everything else was a manila envelope, cream-colored, with her name written on it in Earl's handwriting. Helen Crawford, it said, for when you need it. Her hands shook. She sat with the envelope in her lap for a long minute before she opened it. Then she slid a folded letter out, 3 pages of yellow legal pad paper covered in Earl's careful, deliberate print. Attached to it with a paperclip was a business card from the Blue Ridge K9 Foundation with Nora Bishop's name on it. Underneath the letter was a second envelope. It was thicker. Helen opened it. Inside was a copy of a warranty deed, and behind that a copy of a mineral rights survey, and behind that a photocopy of a check made out to Earl Crawford from a company called Piedmont Aggregates for $180,000, dated August of the year Earl had died, with the word refused written across it in Earl's block letters. Helen sat in the barn with a metal box open in her lap and did not move for a long time. Then she unfolded the letter and she began to read. Helen, if you're reading this, I am gone. I hoped I would beat this. I did not. I want you to know first that I made every choice I made because I could not stand the thought of you sitting through the last months of my life watching me fade. You would have done it. You would have done it better than anyone I've ever known. And I could not bear it. So I made choices without you, and now I'm going to tell you what they were, and you are going to forgive me, because that is what we always did for each other. First, about the dog. I have been going to a place in Lynchburg, the Blue Ridge K9 Foundation. They train working dogs and then place them with people who need them. I went in September and asked them if they had a dog who might be right for a woman living out in the country by herself. They said they had a big grey muzzled shepherd who had just retired from search and rescue. His name is Bear. He's a good dog. He's calm. He's smart. He does not bark much. I met him twice. I signed the papers on the 15th of November. I asked them to hold him at their kennel until January because I wanted to have Christmas one more time with you first. I have paid them for his care. That is done. When the time comes, which is any time now, if I am reading the doctors right, they will bring him to you. His name is Bear. I brought your blue scarf to him at our second meeting. I hope he still remembers you when you meet. Second, about the land. 6 years ago, a company called Piedmont Aggregates approached me about buying the mineral rights under our property. Wade Turner runs the local operation for them. He does not own the 200 acres to the east on his own account. He is the local buyer for the company. He has been pressuring me for 6 years to sell, and about a year ago the pressure got worse. They offered me $180,000 for the mineral rights under our land. I refused. I refused because if I signed those papers, they would put a limestone quarry within 1,000 yards of the kitchen window. The blasting would crack the foundation. The dust would kill the orchard. The truck traffic would ruin the road. And I know you, Helen. I know you would rather die on that porch than watch that happen to this place. I did not tell you about the offer because I did not want you to spend the last months of my life fighting a man like Wade Turner. I filed the mineral rights refusal with the county in September. It is on record. Piedmont Aggregates cannot come at us again for that offer without going through a formal challenge in court, and they will not do that as long as the refusal is on file. But Wade Turner is going to come at you when I am gone. He's going to try to buy the land outright. He's going to try to make you sell. He's going to try to make it feel small and lonely and impossible for you to stay out here. Do not sell, Helen. If you want to sell later, if the land gets too heavy, sell it to somebody who will keep it. Not to him, not to that company. There is a woman at the Virginia Land Conservancy named Ellen Rhodes, whose card I have put in this envelope. She has been asking me for 2 years about a conservation easement. That is the answer if you ever want out. Not Wade Turner. Never Wade Turner. Third, I love you. I have loved you since the second Saturday of October of 1967, when I walked you home from the church supper and you told me my tie was on crooked and fixed it for me in the street. I have loved you every day since. I love you today. I love you the day you read this. I will love you the day you close this letter and put it back in the box. I am sorry I could not tell you in person. Take care of Bear. He will take care of you. Earl. Helen sat in the barn for a long time after she finished the letter. Bear was lying at her feet. The cold was creeping up her boots. The light through the west window was moving slowly across the workbench. She did not cry. She had cried the night before. She was somewhere past crying now. After a while, she folded the letter carefully and put it back in the manila envelope. She put the envelope in the pocket of Earl's old barn jacket. She closed the metal box and put it back under the workbench. She reached down and put her hand on Bear's head. "He knew you," she said softly. "He knew you before I did." Bear looked at her. "We are not selling this land, mister. We are not selling 1 inch. She stood up. She took her cane. She walked out of the barn and back to the house, and Bear walked beside her, and the wind came up in the tops of the oaks, and somewhere down toward the county road, a dark red pickup drove slowly past the mailbox for the second time that morning. Wade Turner was not stupid. He was slow, and he was greedy, and he was used to being underestimated, but he was not stupid. He knew by the day after Nora Bishop's visit that his story about the dog was not going to hold. He had a police chip he could not explain, a placement history he could not fake, and a Roanoke Foundation director with a notary on speed dial. The dog was not going to be his lever. So Wade Turner moved to a different lever. The letter arrived on a Thursday, 10 days after Helen read Earl's letter in the barn. It was from a law firm in Roanoke. It informed Helen Crawford in cool professional language that Piedmont Aggregates was formally reopening its inquiry into the mineral rights under her property and that a representative would like to meet with her at her earliest convenience to discuss a revised offer. The letter noted in a paragraph near the bottom that Piedmont Aggregates was aware that Mrs. Crawford had recently suffered a serious medical event and that they hoped to work with her to arrange terms that would ease the burden of maintaining a rural property alone. Helen read the letter twice. Then she picked up the phone and called Patricia. "He is coming for the land," she said. "Who is?" "Wade Turner, only he is not Wade Turner. He is Piedmont Aggregates, and they are coming for the land." Patricia was in the car within the hour. The 2 weeks after that were the hardest of Helen's life. Not the fall. The fall had been over in a day. This was harder. This was the slow kind. Every morning she woke up and Bear was on the rug by the wood stove, and every morning she made coffee, and every morning she and Patricia sat at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out in front of them and made calls, and every morning it felt like the walls were moving in a little further. Ellen Rhodes at the Virginia Land Conservancy took Helen's call on the second day. She drove out from Charlottesville on the third. She sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours and drank 3 cups of coffee and left with a folder of Earl's paperwork and a list of things to do. Nora Bishop drove out again on the 4th day, bringing Bear's official transfer papers, signed, notarized, chip transferred, and stayed for lunch. The county sheriff, an old friend of Rick Baxter's named Sheriff Dean McLeod, came out on the 6th day and sat on the porch with Helen and Bear and listened to the whole thing. He did not say much. He asked her to hold on to the letter Earl had written and to hold on to the letter Piedmont Aggregates had sent, and he took a copy of both back into town. On the 8th day, Wade Turner filed a complaint with the County Animal Control Office, claiming that Helen Crawford was harboring a dog that had bitten a member of his family on his property. Helen did not sleep that night. Patricia sat with her at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning. Bear lay across their feet. "He is losing on the land," Patricia said, "so he is coming for the dog." "Yes. He is not going to get the dog, Mama." "I know. But we have to prove it." "I know." The animal control hearing was set for a Tuesday in the 3rd week of November. Sheriff McLeod came by the night before with a manila folder of his own. He had spent the last week making phone calls. Piedmont Aggregates had a history in 3 other counties of using pressure tactics on elderly landowners. Wade Turner had been named in 2 civil complaints in Bedford County that had never come to trial. And most importantly, the person Wade Turner had listed on his animal control complaint as the member of my family bitten by the dog was Wade Turner's 24-year-old nephew, who had a small claims judgment against him in Roanoke for filing a false insurance claim 2 years earlier. "Miss Helen," Sheriff McLeod said, sitting on her porch step, "I am not going to promise you this is going to be easy, but I am going to tell you that I think this man has overplayed his hand." Helen nodded. She was very tired. "Thank you, Dean. You bring the dog tomorrow. You bring Nora Bishop. You bring your daughter. You wear something that looks like Sunday, and you let me do the talking about the complaint." "Yes, Dean." He stood up. He looked at Bear, who was lying at Helen's feet. "You brought this man home, buddy," he said. Bear thumped his tail once against the porch boards. The morning of the hearing, Patricia found Helen already dressed at 6 a.m., good navy dress, the pearl earrings Earl had given her for their 30th anniversary, sensible shoes, cane. Bear had had a bath the night before, which he had endured with the resigned patience of a dog who understood that dignity sometimes required cooperation. Patricia drove them into town. The Millbrook Courthouse was a small brick building on Main Street with a green metal roof and a set of concrete steps that Helen had climbed exactly twice in her life, once to renew her driver's license and once, 40 years ago, to sit on a jury. She climbed them today for the 3rd time. Bear walked at her left side. Nora Bishop and Patricia flanked her. Sheriff McLeod met them at the door and held it open. Wade Turner was already inside, seated at a small table in the front. He had brought a lawyer. The lawyer was a soft-looking man in a grey suit who did not make eye contact with Helen when she came in. Wade Turner did. He looked at her, and he looked at Bear, and something in his face said clearly that he had not expected her to bring the dog. The hearing was informal. The animal control officer was a woman named Ms. Delaney, who had done this job for 15 years and had, by her own admission later, never seen anything quite like the morning that unfolded in front of her. Wade Turner's lawyer went first. He described a peaceful November afternoon on which Wade Turner's nephew, a young man named Kyle, had gone for a walk on the county road near Wade's property and had been menaced and then bitten in the calf by a large German shepherd that had come out of Helen Crawford's woods. The lawyer produced a photograph of a wound on a calf. He produced a receipt from an urgent care clinic in Roanoke. He described Bear, in careful legal language, as an unrestrained animal of aggressive lineage, and he requested that Bear be removed from Helen Crawford's property and taken into county custody pending a full behavioral assessment. Miss Delaney turned to Helen. "Mrs. Crawford." Helen stood up. Her cane made a small sound on the linoleum. Bear stood up with her quietly. "I would like Sheriff McLeod to speak first, if that is all right," Helen said. "That is all right." Sheriff McLeod stood up. He was a large man in a pressed uniform, and he did not speak loudly, but he did not have to. "Ms. Delaney," he said, "this dog is a retired search and rescue animal, registered with the Blue Ridge Canine Foundation. He was legally placed with Earl Crawford, the late husband of Mrs. Crawford, in November of 2 years ago. The placement is documented, notarized, and on file. Ms. Nora Bishop of the Foundation is here today with the original paperwork. This dog is, in every meaningful sense, a service animal, and he has been serving Mrs. Crawford, including on the day this past October when he stayed with her for 6 hours on a dirt road after she suffered a stroke, and led our own postal carrier to her before she died of exposure." Miss Delaney was writing. She did not look up. "As for the alleged bite," Sheriff McLeod went on, "I have some concerns." He opened his folder. "The alleged victim is Kyle Turner, the 24-year-old nephew of the complainant. He has an outstanding judgment against him in the Roanoke Small Claims Court for filing a false insurance claim 2 years ago. The urgent care clinic listed on his receipt is a walk-in facility that does not verify cause of injury. The photograph submitted was time-stamped at 8:14 p.m. on a Saturday. The county's most recent records show that Kyle Turner was not, on that date, at his uncle's property. He was in Lynchburg, at a bar, where he was involved in an altercation for which he was cited by the Lynchburg police at 9:20 p.m. that same evening." Wade Turner's lawyer opened his mouth. Sheriff McLeod looked at him. "I would prefer, sir, that you let me finish." The lawyer closed his mouth. "I have here," Sheriff McLeod went on, "the incident report from the Lynchburg police. The injury described in the report, a laceration on the lower right calf, matches the photograph submitted by Mr. Wade Turner. In fact, it is the photograph submitted by Mr. Wade Turner. Same wound, same angle, same date stamp." The courtroom was very quiet. "Ms. Delaney," Sheriff McLeod said, "in my opinion, this complaint is false. In my opinion, it was filed in bad faith. In my opinion, the complainant is attempting to use this office to seize an animal for reasons that have nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with a land dispute the complainant is losing." Ms. Delaney set her pen down. She looked at Wade Turner. Wade Turner did not look back. "Mr. Turner," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" "Would you like to respond to the sheriff's account?" Wade Turner's lawyer leaned over and whispered in his ear. Wade Turner shook his head once. His lawyer straightened up and said in a small voice, "We would like to withdraw the complaint, Ms. Delaney." "You would like to withdraw it?" "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Turner, Miss Delaney said, I want you to look at me. He looked at her. I have been in this job 15 years, and I have never seen a complaint like this one, and I do not want to see one like it again. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. You have wasted this office's time. You have wasted Mrs. Crawford's time. You have wasted this dog's time, and I'm not going to forget this. No, ma'am. The complaint was dismissed at 9:47 a.m. Sheriff McLeod walked Helen out to the sidewalk. Bear walked beside her. Patricia was already crying quietly. Nora Bishop was holding Helen's other elbow. The morning sun had come out. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Sheriff McLeod stopped and put a hand very lightly on Helen's shoulder. That is not the end, Miss Helen. The company is still going to come at your land. I know. I am going to be watching them. I know, Dean. He looked at Bear. And so is he. Bear thumped his tail once against the sidewalk. They went home. They had lunch. Nora Bishop drove back to Lynchburg. Patricia called her husband, and Helen went out to the porch and sat down in the rocking chair Earl had built for her 28 years ago, and she rocked slowly, and Bear laid his head on her boot. The 2 weeks after the hearing were quieter. Piedmont Aggregates sent a second letter, more formal, offering to increase the value of their mineral rights offer. Ellen Rhodes at the Land Conservancy sent Helen a draft conservation easement. Helen read it 3 times. She signed it on the first Monday of December, with Patricia as her witness and Ellen Rhodes present, and she filed it at the courthouse the next morning. The easement placed the property under permanent protection. It could never be mined. It could never be subdivided. Wade Turner and Piedmont Aggregates were, from that Monday forward, legally unable to touch it. The third letter from Piedmont Aggregates never came. The dark red pickup stopped rolling past the driveway. Wade Turner sold his house, which had indeed been a company house, not his own, and moved out of Millbrook the following spring. Helen never saw him again. The rest was quieter still and slower, and in the small, stubborn way of country lives, beautiful. Helen walked the dirt road every morning with Bear. She used the cane for the first 6 months, and then, one Saturday in April, she left it on the porch by accident and did not notice until she was halfway to the cattle gate. Bear noticed. He looked up at her. Helen looked down at him and laughed. "Well," she said, "look at us." He walked her the rest of the way and back, and she did not fall, and after that day she carried the cane less and less. The neurologist in Roanoke was surprised. Physical therapy could only account for so much, she said. Helen said nothing about the dog who was always at her left side. She let the neurologist keep being surprised. Patricia came up on weekends. Sometimes she brought her husband Marcus. Sometimes she brought her son Sam, who was 15 and awkward and did not quite know what to do in the country, but who took to Bear immediately. Bear tolerated Sam with the patience of an old professional. Sam learned to sit quietly on the porch and let a dog make the first move. Sam came back most weekends after that. In May, Nora Bishop drove out with a small brass tag she had made at a hardware store in Lynchburg. It said Bear on one side and on the other the phone number of Helen's kitchen. She hooked it onto his collar and left it there. Helen watched her do it and did not say anything, and Nora did not say anything, and Bear stood between them on the porch and thumped his tail slowly against the boards. And that was that. A local reporter from the Roanoke Times came out in the fall to write a story about a woman and a dog and a dirt road. Helen let him take one picture on the front porch of the two of them. She refused to be interviewed at length. She said, when he pressed only one thing, "He was my husband's last gift to me," she said. "That is the whole story." The reporter printed it exactly that way. The years after that were kind. Helen kept the orchard. She sold apples at the farmer's market in Millbrook every Saturday from September through November. Bear rode in the passenger seat of her truck to the market and back, and slept under the folding table while she made change. Children in town knew him. They came up and asked always if they could pet him. Helen always said yes, and Bear always allowed it, with the grave courtesy of an old man being kissed by grandchildren. He grew slower. His hips got worse. Dr. Kessler gave him medicine. Helen carried him up the porch steps in the last winter, one at a time, with her good arm around his chest and her weaker arm gripping the railing, and she did it every night without complaint. Bear did not complain either. He rested his head on her shoulder while she carried him. He was heavy. He was worth it. He died on a Sunday in April, 7 years after he had first stepped out of the tree line and lain down beside Helen on the dirt road. He died in his sleep on the rug in front of the wood stove with his head across Helen's boot. She had known it was coming for a week. She had sat up with him the last 3 nights. Patricia drove up. Sam drove up. Nora Bishop drove up. They buried him at the edge of the apple orchard near the tree line where he had first come out of the woods. Helen chose the spot. It was where the light came through the pines in the late afternoon. She did not cry that day. She had cried enough for one lifetime, she said, and Bear had never liked to see her cry. But the next morning, she walked the dirt road alone for the first time in 7 years. She walked it slowly. She used her cane. She had gotten so used to Bear's flank against her left leg that the missing weight felt like a piece of her own body was gone. She walked all the way to the cattle gate. She stood there for a long time, looking down toward the creek. She turned around and walked back. She did not fall. At the mouth of the dirt road, she stopped and looked at the exact spot where he had stepped out of the tree line on that Tuesday in October, all those years ago. There was nothing there now, just leaves, just pines, just the same road she had walked her whole adult life. "Thank you," she said out loud to the tree line. The tree line did not answer. It did not need to. Helen Crawford was 78 years old that morning. She lived another 11 years. She never left the property. She never sold a single inch of it. When she died at 89, in her own bed in the farmhouse Earl had built for her in 1979, Patricia and Sam were with her. So was a young shepherd puppy from the Blue Ridge K9 Foundation that Nora Bishop's successor had brought out 3 years earlier. The puppy's name was Ranger. He was on the rug in front of the wood stove. Helen had asked Patricia in the last week to make sure Ranger was taken care of. Patricia had promised. Patricia had also promised something else, that Helen's ashes would go in the orchard, at the tree line, next to Bear's grave, at the edge of the light that came through the pines in the late afternoon. Patricia kept both promises. There is a small brass plaque there now. It says 2 names and 2 dates and 1 line underneath. Earl Crawford's last gift and Helen's answer to it. The dirt road behind the house in Millbrook, Virginia is still there. Somebody walks it every morning. That is the arrangement. That is how it has always been. And if you go out there in the fall, when the light is thin and long and the frost sits in the low grass, and if you are quiet for a while at the mouth of the road, you may see, just for a second, out of the corner of your eye, a big grey-muzzled shepherd stepping quietly out of the tree line and turning to look at you as if to say, "Softly go on. You will go on," because that is what he was for. If this story touched something in you, if it brought back the memory of a dog or a husband or a road you have walked alone, leave a comment, tell someone this story tonight, and hit the like button so we can keep telling stories about the small, quiet miracles that walk out of the tree line when we need them most. And subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you when it is your turn to need it.